Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with trumpeter Shane Endsley of the cool modern group Kneebody. He talked about their newest 2019 CD called Chapters and the band's history. The group met in their late teens while at the Eastman School and Cal Arts. They became fast friends and converged together amid a very vibrant and eclectic music scene of Los Angeles back in 2001. In their almost two-decade history, this Grammy-nominated band has created a jazz sound all on their own. So please get to know Shane and Kneebody and dig this interview, my friends.
Shane, man, I'm a huge fan of you guys. Just want to tell you up front, so it's an honor and a pleasure to speak with you on behalf of Kneebody. Thank you for taking a minute out.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and much appreciated. Thanks for the support.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So let's talk about your latest 2019 project, your CD Chapters. Talk to me about the artistic vision for this project.
It's a real culmination of a lot of things the band has been working on. We have all these guests, mostly vocalists, jumping in with us, although there's Gerald Clayton on piano, and then Josh Dion's actually, playing drums and singing and playing keyboards at the same time. But that's something we've been talking about doing for a few years, actually, like wanting to, because we've collaborated with other artists over the years. Like we did the Ives album with Theo Fleckman and our Needless album with electronic musician Daedalus. And in the earlier days, we used to do more sort of backing up other bands or having guest vocalists and other artists on our like residency gigs in New York and LA. So it's something we've been wanting to kind of document and record for a while. And so finally, with this album Chapters and our previous sort of like EP release with all the cover tunes on it, that was like our finally culmination of all the talking about getting these guests together to record. And so it was partly that, and then it's partly the other half was just like Kneebody music and like kind of just whatever the next evolution of our composition is. And I think originally we were kind of picturing having like more of like an all vocal album and then a new like Kneebody album, but we ended up just sort of breaking it up differently to separate out these covered tunes and then have this album that mixes our like solo stuff and work with guests. I guess it's kind of a long answer, but additionally, for even like the Kneebody on our own stuff that we're doing kind of represents our band, this transition that we're going through where we've been the quintet with Kaveh Rasagar on bass for so many years, and then now with him stepping away from the band and we're becoming quartet with Nate Wood playing bass and drums at the same time, freakishly enough. We document both of those things on the album. Also, Kaveh's on a few of the tracks, or like more than half the tracks, and a few with Nate doing what he's doing in the band now.
So speaking of evolution, how do you guys see each successive project you put out? Is it an evolution? Is it a stamp in time? How do you see this artistic evolution of yours?
Yeah, we definitely see it as an evolution because, we're in this band together. So we're all, it feels like we're on this path together. So it really does feel like we're evolving together. And each new project we get to, we think it's just sort of a document of the progress that we make as a band.
Talk to me about the beginnings of the band. How did you guys come together and how did everything kind of begin for you guys?
That's when we were pretty young. I guess really early on, I met the original bassist Kaveh out here in Denver, where we both grew up. And we met when we were about 18 and 19 years old and started playing in what was acid jazz, bands back then. It was sort of like funk jazz jamming with DJs and rappers and stuff. And we kind of met through that and became fast friends and started playing together and started a band together, which was actually in some ways not so different, from Kneebody in a way. In the early days and made that connection. But then I went off to school in upstate New York in Rochester at the Eastman School of Music, and that's where I met Ben Wendell, our saxophonist, and Adam Benjamin, our keyboardist. And then Kaveh, after I was telling him how much I liked Eastman and the great, they're like the students and teachers there, he ended up coming out to Eastman and meeting those guys as well. And then we all ended up migrating to Los Angeles for one reason or another. And that's where we met Nate Wood, our drummer, and now drummer/bassist. And so LA was where the group really formed, and it came together. We used to play all the time at this one club on the west side in Santa Monica. It's no longer there, but it was a really fun place called the Temple Bar. And it was just a cool, sort of eclectic place where there was all kinds of music during the week. And we would play there as part of other projects, as just sort of as hired musicians and all the time. We would always be there a few times a week. So it was really a cool sort of home base for us. individually. And then at some point they offered, I think Ben, a regular weekly night there. And then he put together a quartet with Kaveh and Nate and Adam. And I was on the road quite a bit at the time with Ani DeFranco. And then that sort of concluded not too long after they were doing that week residency. So I jumped in with them. So that's how we kind of started, was this like Monday night gig in Santa Monica. And it was, we just kind of all were into writing music. And so like that was the natural focus from the beginning. It's like, let's, just start bringing in the stuff that we're writing and do our band.
The interesting thing about you guys is you're jazz, but you have these electronic elements, these experimental elements. Mm-hmm. Do you see that as being kind of a driving force with a lot of jazz that's going on these days that might be able to sell more units, get more people in? I know that jazz historically, it really doesn't matter to the musician. I don't know if I've ever interviewed a musician that laments the fact that they're doing what they're doing, because they're going to do it no matter what. But I guess my question isn't, you're doing this because of that, but do you think this helps you gain a wider audience?
I think it does help a bit. It's not like some magic wand or anything. I mean, and actually I feel like now in recent years there's a little more precedent for like this modern chapter of like more electronic, rock, hip hop sort of influenced jazz. And like I feel like even when we were starting, we've been in band for 18 years now, that when we were kind of getting going, there was less of that going on at the time, and there wasn't as much of a place for us in like jazz festivals and jazz clubs, and we were kind of like forcing our way in there because it's like, the music kind of falls in between these cracks. It's basically, jazz in the way, the broader sense that it's, it deals with sort of improvisation in a very jazz-like way, and sort of a lot of the harmony and composition. You can definitely relate it to jazz, but it's definitely not traditional. And so in some ways I felt like it was trickier because we're mostly have been defined by the things that we aren't, like we're not jazz and we're not rock, but we're kind of a mix of all this stuff. So sometimes it felt like it was a little hard to have an identity. But on the other hand, I do think that elements of the music are a little more modern and relatable to like a general audience. And so it is maybe more possible to sort of pull in some people that might not naturally gravitate towards more like avant-garde or traditional jazz. But, in the end of the day, really like most of the folks that come to hear us are people that are already like avid listeners and people that are really checking out new music and are like kind of listening on a deep level. And it's still not stuff that just kind of grabs everyone right off the street and like kind of pulls them right in. I think when they're at the shows and they see us play and like we have like a real joyful stage presence in the way we present the music there, like I think that really helps to kind of just relate it to folks who might not otherwise hear music like that. But it's I think it might help a little bit in terms of sort of popularity or selling music, but it's ultimately I think kind of nominal. It's still weird music, underground music in a large extent.
What's been the most pleasurable part of being involved with this band? You guys have been together for a long time. What do you like the best about being in this group?
Well, I think that we have our own sound, and I feel really proud of that. Like the way that we've sort of built something that's I think is really pretty unique, and I think anybody has like a definable sound, and that feels so personal and individual for all of us. I feel like we all get to really be ourselves, and at the same time, come together to create this, this whole that works together in a special way. And for me, that's the most gratifying thing, like the way we do it together, the communal effort, but still like the individual expression being totally realized. I just realized like that's really lucky to have that. It's hard to cultivate that and to have it last for a long time. That's what I kind of really enjoy the most. Is just it feels like a complete like home base and a family, in itself.
In this talk that we've had in this journey of weaving together the world of Kneebody, you've mentioned Denver, New York, and LA, which is unique because you have both corners of the country and the middle of the country. How have these geographic areas influenced all of you and the sound that you have?
Well, they definitely have. I mean, for Kaveh and I growing up here, obviously we're just kind of influenced by what was happening when we were growing up. There's a handful of like really fantastic jazz improviser, composers here, Ron Miles and Art Landy in particular, really influenced us quite a bit. When we moved out to LA, that scene was less steeped in acoustic and sort of more progressive jazz than New York, and I think we were playing a lot more music that was, like funk music based or world music sort of oriented or hip hop oriented, and so that was what we were doing quite a bit when the band formed, and it definitely informed the music. And then after the first few years, we all started to migrate. I moved back to New York proper, and I've been there most of my adult life. And then Ben and Nate moved back a few years after me, and when they moved back to New York, they started playing with all, like folks in New York, like Wayne Krantz and Tigran Amassian, Mark Juliana and Donnie McCaslin and Dave Binney and like all these definitively like New York musicians. And so it definitely changed the way that they were playing and writing music, and that, definitely we brought that into Kneebody. Like I for sure I remember specifically even when Nate and Ben were playing with Tigran Amassian, is like such a virtuoso on piano and like a real rhythmic expert and virtuoso. That a lot of like the ways that he's like dividing up beats and thinking of sort of odd meters and different ways of like stringing beats together and like subdividing and reinventing them in these really creative ways, that they had to really learn that and work really hard to be able to do it in his music, and that certainly came out in the way they were playing in Kneebody and the way Ben was writing for Kneebody, and that's definitely a sound that's kind of lasted over these years since Tigran. So yeah, anything we do individually, it always comes into the band, and these different cities, they do have their sort of musical personalities, and they naturally, sort of kind of channel their way into our music.
So overall, how do you think the health and vitality of jazz in America, how's it doing in 2019?
In a lot of ways, it's great. I mean, some of the music that people are making and the quality of the musicians and musicianship is just, it's incredible and inspiring. And I do think that there is like when we're out, we see a lot of like young audience coming out to see us, and I know that there's other groups that are having that same experience. I do think that there is a really kind of exciting, time in jazz now, where there's these sort of like new developments and new like sort of crew of people that are really actively recording and touring that are just so great, like so such a pleasure to play with and to hear play. So I think it's actually it's a great time. It's obviously I don't know, in the music industry there's so many big changes going on, and jazz music is always a small slice of that music industry, so there's certain things that I think are changing, certain things are kind of the same, but overall I feel really inspired and happy about it.
What would you say collectively as a band have been some of your, jazz influences? Maybe albums you listened to or each respective member would have listened to in their formative jazz development. Who influences you guys?
Well, yeah, let me see. We could probably name some personally and collectively. I mean, for me personally, when I was, 14 and 15 is when I really kind of discovered jazz, and the stuff that really grabbed me was the kind of like 50s era Blue Note, like the hard bop sort of jazz. Like I love Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers and Horace Silver's albums, and Clifford Brown, Max Roach Quintet, Miles and John Coltrane, and like that's the first stuff that I really got into, and it still for me is like just some of my all-time favorite music and play very often. And we all share those that influence of that like amazing period in jazz. But also, other important people like the Ornette Coleman, groups and Keith Jarrett groups are really big. Brad Mehldau is a huge influence on us. Wayne Krantz has definitely been an influence on us. I used to play with Steve Coleman for a while, and when we were studying at Eastman, his trumpet player at the time was Ralph Leslie, so he was bringing in a lot of that music. So that certainly influenced us. And then I don't know. We really. We are really jazz lovers for sure, so we do get influenced by like a pretty broad spectrum. Like I really, love early jazz too, and whenever I get a chance, like try and do my best, Louis Armstrong impression whenever there's a chance to do it. So we get a lot of influence from jazz over different periods.
When you guys have been together for quite a while, and I'm going to kind of ask kind of a fantastical question here, and it's this. If you had a dream tonight and you ran into your younger self when this band started, you could give yourself advice, what advice would you give your younger self?
Man, that's a really great question. Yeah, we've been a band for 18 years now. So it really started when I was in, my mid-20s, and I'm in mid-40s now. I think what I would advise myself to do back then would be to even maybe push even harder with it at the beginning when we're younger and have more time to really go on tours for longer and really kind of just hit the streets and try and build the band up and invest even more of our time and money, maybe expense too, just find a way to really, invest even more in the band at the beginning once we realized that it was something special and that we really wanted to do. And we were certainly working hard on it and really pushing, but looking back and just kind of learning more about how much work really goes into, developing artistic output and then making it actually exist in the world in terms of recording, touring, and getting press and, gathering an audience and trying to, sell units. And it's so much I didn't quite realize the extent of it back then. So I guess I would advise myself and us as a band, collectively, that if we could have even learned a little more about the business of music early on and really kind of dug our heels in even a little more to just try and really invest in the band at the beginning and extend ourselves even a little further.
So why do you love jazz?
Oh, I don't know. It makes me feel good. I mean, that's hard to pinpoint that. I mean, I love the, I don't know how to just to sum it up. It's, I grew up in a music house. My father was a professional trumpet player and publisher and instrument maker. My mom played flute in the symphony here for years and years. So I grew up in a house where music was valued and was part of the family language. I guess now I'm talking about it, one of the thing I really love about jazz, for me, listening and certainly for playing, is the element of, that personal, spontaneous expression and interaction. I love the game of trying to improvise with other people and manage all the technical details with rhythm and harmony and form and all this, but to really be in the moment together and feel that the possibilities are endless and that, the music can kind of go anywhere if you're ready to just take a chance on it and listen to each other and explore together. And that kind of, in the moment, spontaneous music making, I think is what really has drawn me to jazz music and improvised music over the years.
So everyone has a perception of who you all are as a band. Your family does, your friends, your fan base, but you guys know who you are. Who do you guys think you are? What's your perception of who you guys are as a band?
I think we all perceive ourselves as really dedicated musicians. I think that we all are on the same page where this is our life's work individually, and that our collective work in Kneebody is also really our life's work. We've put so much into it together. So I think we really see ourselves as always, students of the music, and always in that mode of trying to just get better and better at what we do, and just to be, keep getting, more and more understanding of how music works and how other musicians do it and how the music world works, how the world works. So that's how I see us. We all are, we have families and relationships and busy adult lives, and we're very much that too. I see us as a pretty family-oriented band, and that's part of our identity also.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys evolve into the future. Shane, thank you for opening up about Kneebody. Thank you for your time, and thank you for all the music.
Thanks again for having us, Joe. Much appreciated.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and bands in Denver, California, New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Shane on behalf of Kneebody for their cool music and time. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.